The lawyer told me the ranch was worthless, just a collapsed barn on barren land. But when I found the hidden door beneath the rubble, I realized my grandmother had been protecting something far more valuable than property. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button real quick. Tomorrow, I'm sharing a story that'll completely change how you think about family secrets. I was 18 years old and 3 days when I walked out of Meadowbrook Children's Home with everything I owned stuffed into a backpack and one battered suitcase. Mrs. Chen had already processed my exit paperwork, handed me a folder with my birth certificate and medical records, and given me that same sympathetic smile she gave every kid who aged out of the system. The smile that said, "Good luck, you're going to need it." 11 years. That's how long I'd been at Meadowbrook after my mom died from pneumonia when I was 7. No other family, no emergency contacts, just me and a system that kept me fed and sheltered, but never really made me feel like I belonged anywhere. I was sitting on the front steps, trying to figure out my next move, when Mrs. Rodriguez from the administrative office came rushing out with an envelope. "Emma, wait!" she called, slightly out of breath. "This came for you yesterday, and I completely forgot with everything going on." The envelope was thick, official-looking, with a returned address from a law firm in Montana. Montana. I'd never even been out of Ohio, let alone knew anyone in Montana. Inside was a letter from an attorney named Michael Porter informing me that my maternal grandmother, Dorothy May Sullivan, had passed away 6 weeks earlier at the age of 83. I stared at the name, trying to pull up any memory of her, but came up empty. My mom had never talked about her family, and I'd always assumed I didn't have any. According to the letter, my grandmother had left me her property in rural Montana, a ranch, apparently, though Mr. Porter was careful to manage my expectations. "I must be forthright with you," he'd written. "The property has been abandoned for approximately 15 years. The main house was destroyed in a fire in 2009. All that remains is a collapsed barn and 60 acres of overgrown land. The property taxes are current through the end of this year, but beyond that, you'll need to decide whether to maintain ownership or sell." He went on to explain that there was also a small amount of money, about $4,000, left in an account that would transfer to me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than I'd ever had. I read the letter 3 times, trying to process what it meant. A grandmother I'd never known had left me land in Montana, land with nothing on it but a collapsed barn. It should have felt like a cruel joke, but instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: curiosity, maybe even a small spark of hope. The next day, I called Mr. Porter's office. His secretary patched me through, and his voice was kind but measured. "Miss Sullivan, I'm glad you called. I wanted to discuss your options for the property." "What are my options?" I asked, sitting in the Meadowbrook common room, with the phone pressed to my ear. "Well, the most practical choice would be to sell. The land itself has some value, despite the lack of structures. I've had a few inquiries from neighboring ranchers who might be interested in purchasing it for grazing. You could probably get $20,000 to $25,000 for it, which would give you a good start." $25,000. That was life-changing money for someone like me. But something made me hesitate. What if I wanted to see it first, before I decide? There was a pause on the other end of the line. That's certainly your right, Miss Sullivan, though I should warn you it's quite remote. The nearest town is Cedar Ridge, population around 800. The property is another 12 miles outside of town down a dirt road. There's no electricity, no running water, nothing but land and that collapsed barn. I understand, I said, even though I didn't really understand at all. I just knew I needed to see it. Can you give me the address? Mr. Porter sighed, but gave me the information, along with directions and his contact details. If you do decide to visit, please be careful. The barn structure is unstable and the property hasn't been maintained. And Miss Sullivan, if you need help with anything, don't hesitate to call. I used most of my savings to buy a bus ticket to Montana. The journey took 2 days with multiple transfers, and I slept fitfully in my seat, watching the landscape change from Ohio's green hills to the vast open spaces of the West. Cedar Ridge was exactly as Mr. Porter had described. A main street with a few shops, a diner, a post office, and not much else. I got off the bus with my backpack and suitcase, standing in the gravel parking lot, and wondered what I'd gotten myself into. The diner seemed like the best place to start, so I walked in and took a seat at the counter. A woman in her 50s with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail came over with a coffee pot. "You passin' through, honey?" she asked, pouring me a cup without waiting for an answer. "Actually, I'm trying to get out to the old Sullivan property," I said. "Do you know it?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Dorothy's place? You family?" "Her granddaughter, Emma." The woman's entire demeanor changed. She set down the coffee pot and stuck out her hand. "I'm Janet. I knew your grandmother, though I haven't seen her in probably 15 years, not since she moved to Billings after the fire. How is Dorothy?" "She passed away," I said quietly. 6 weeks ago." Janet's face fell. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Dorothy was a good woman, tough as nails, but had a heart of gold." She paused, studying my face. "You said you're trying to get out to the property? You know there's nothing out there anymore, right? Just the old barn and last. I heard it had collapsed." "I know. I just want to see it." Janet nodded slowly. "Tell you what, my shift ends in an hour. I'll drive you out there myself. You shouldn't be wandering around that property alone, especially if you've never been there before." True to her word, Janet picked me up an hour later in an old pickup truck. We drove through town and out onto increasingly rough roads, the pavement giving way to gravel and then to dirt. The landscape was beautiful in a stark, lonely way. Rolling hills covered in prairie grass, distant mountains on the horizon, and a sky so big it made me feel impossibly small. "Dorothy loved this land," Janet said as we drove. "She and your grandfather built everything themselves. The house, the barn, the fences. They ran cattle for years, made a decent living. But after he died, it got harder for her to manage alone." "What happened to my mom?" I asked, the question I'd been carrying for years, finally finding its way out. Janet's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Your mama was Sarah, right?" I nodded. "She left Cedar Ridge when she was 17, pregnant and scared. Dorothy wanted her to stay, but Sarah had other ideas. Thought she could make it work in the city. Dorothy never forgave herself for letting her go." "Did she ever try to find us?" "She did," Janet said softly. "After you were born, she went to Ohio looking for Sarah. But by the time she got there, your mama had already passed, and you were in the system. Dorothy tried to get custody, but she was 70 years old, living on a remote ranch with no support system. Social services said no. The pieces of my life suddenly shifted into a different picture. My grandmother hadn't abandoned me. She'd tried. We turned onto an even rougher road, and Janet slowed down as we approached a clearing. "There it is," she said. The land stretched out before us, wild and overgrown, but undeniably beautiful. In the distance I could see the remains of what must have been the house, just a foundation and some blackened timbers. And there, about 100 yards away, was the barn. Except it wasn't collapsed. It was leaning heavily to one side, roof sagging and boards weathered gray, but it was still standing, barely. "Huh," Janet said, sounding surprised. "I heard it had fallen down completely. Guess the old girl's tougher than people thought." We got out of the truck, and I walked slowly toward the barn, my heart pounding. The structure groaned in the wind, and I could see gaps in the boards where daylight streamed through. The large doors hung crooked on their hinges. "Be careful," Janet called. "Don't go inside. It could come down any second." But I had to look. I pulled one of the doors open just enough to peer inside, and my breath caught in my throat. The interior was dim and dusty, with hay scattered across the floor and old equipment pushed against the walls. But that wasn't what made me freeze. In the center of the barn, there was a large section of floor that looked different from the rest. Newer boards, arranged in a square about 8 feet across, and in the middle of those boards was an iron ring, like a handle. What comes next is something I never saw coming. Stick with me and make sure you subscribe. I turned to Janet, who was standing by the truck. "Do you have a flashlight?" She rummaged in her glove compartment and came back with a heavy maglite. "What did you find?" "I'm not sure yet." The barn shifted and creaked as I stepped inside, every instinct telling me this was dangerous, but I couldn't stop now. I made my way carefully to the center section, testing each step before putting my full weight down. When I reached the iron ring, I knelt and grabbed it with both hands. The trapdoor was heavy but not locked. It lifted with a groan, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. A ladder that looked much newer than anything else in the barn, made of treated wood that couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 years old. "Emma, what is that?" Janet's voice was sharp with concern. "I think it's a cellar or something." I shined the flashlight down into the opening. The ladder dropped about 10 feet to a concrete floor. "I'm going down." "Absolutely not," Janet said, coming closer but not entering the barn. "That's insane. You don't know what's down there." But I was already on the ladder, climbing down into the cool darkness. The flashlight beam swept across the space as my feet hit solid ground, and what I saw made me gasp. It wasn't a cellar, it was a room, a finished, maintained room about 20 feet square with concrete walls and floor. And it was full. Shelves lined every wall, holding boxes, crates, and containers, all carefully labeled and organized. In one corner was a desk with a chair, and on the desk sat a laptop computer, its screen dark, but the power cord running to what looked like a battery system connected to solar panels, the cables running up through a pipe to the surface. In the opposite corner was a small bed with blankets, a camping stove, water jugs, and supplies. Like someone had prepared this space to be lived in if necessary. But it was the boxes that drew my attention. I opened the nearest one and found it full of photo albums. I pulled one out and opened it, shining my flashlight on pages filled with pictures, pictures of my mother as a child, as a teenager, smiling and riding horses and helping with ranch work. Pictures I'd never seen before. The next album was labeled Emma in careful handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. Photos of me, dozens of them, school pictures, candid shots that must have been taken from a distance, printed articles about the spelling bee I'd won in 5th grade, a certificate from when I'd made honor roll. My entire childhood documented by someone who'd been watching from afar. My grandmother, she'd never stopped following my life. I spent the next hour going through the room, discovering layer after layer of my grandmother's careful planning. There were boxes of documents, legal papers showing that she'd set aside money for me over the years, building that $4,000 account one painful deposit at a time. There were letters she'd written but never sent, telling me about the ranch, about my mother, about her regrets. One box contained tools, hardware, seeds, and instruction manuals, everything someone would need to rebuild. Another held books on farming, ranching, sustainable living, and construction. The laptop was password protected, but there was a note taped to it in an envelope with my name on it. Emma, it read, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found the room. I'm sorry for all the secrets, but I had to protect what I was building for you. The password is your mother's birthday, 07141985. Everything you need to know is on this computer. Everything I wanted to tell you, but never could. The ranch isn't worthless, sweetheart. It's your future, if you want it. I love you. I always have. Grandma Dorothy. My hand shook as I typed in the password, 07141985, July 14th, 1985. The computer came to life, its battery still holding charge from the solar system. The desktop had a single folder labeled For Emma. Inside were dozens of video files, each one dated and titled. I clicked on the first one, dated 3 years earlier. My grandmother's face filled the screen. She was older than in the photos I'd seen, her hair completely white and her face lined with age, but her eyes were bright and determined. "Hello, Emma," she said, her voice crackling slightly through the old speakers. "I don't know when you'll see this or even if you will, but I'm making these recordings because I need you to understand what I'm leaving you and why." She went on to explain that after the house fire in 2009, which had been started by faulty wiring, she'd decided not to rebuild on the surface. Instead, she'd used her insurance money and savings to create something different, something hidden. "I built this room," she said, "because I wanted to leave you something that couldn't be taken away by taxes or legal battles or people who might try to claim you didn't deserve it. This room holds everything I couldn't give you while I was alive. Your history, your mother's story, and the resources to build whatever future you choose." She'd spent the last 15 years of her life maintaining this secret bunker, adding to it, preparing it for the day I might discover it. The barn's collapse had been exaggerated and encouraged, she explained with a slight smile. She'd wanted people to think the property was worthless, abandoned, so no one would bother it while she was putting the pieces in place. I watched video after video, my grandmother teaching me about the land, about ranching, about the water rights and mineral rights that came with the property. She explained that the 60 acres might seem small, but they included access to a crucial water source that made them valuable to the surrounding ranchers. "You have options, sweetheart," she said in one video. You can sell this land for a lot more than anyone's told you. Those water rights alone are worth six figures to the right buyer. Or you can use what I've left you to build something here. The choice is yours, and whatever you decide, I support you. In another video, she showed me documents she'd prepared. Surveys, property assessments, letters from attorneys, all carefully organized and explained. She'd done all the homework, anticipated all the questions, removed all the obstacles. I couldn't be your grandmother in life, she said, tears visible in her eyes, but I can be your foundation in death. Everything in this room is yours. Use it wisely. Use it to build the life your mother and I always wanted for you. I climbed back up the ladder to find Janet pacing anxiously outside the barn. When she saw my face, she stopped. "What did you find down there?" "Everything," I whispered. She left me everything. Over the next week, I stayed in Cedar Ridge, sleeping in a room Janet insisted I take above the diner. Every day, I went out to the ranch and spent hours in my grandmother's hidden room, learning, planning, and beginning to understand the gift I'd been given. Mr. Porter was shocked when I called and told him what I'd found. "Your grandmother was quite a remarkable woman," he said. "I had no idea she'd been preparing all of this. What do you want to do with the property?" "I want to keep it," I said, "and I want to build on it." The $4,000 my grandmother had left me, combined with what I'd learned about the property's true value, gave me options. The water rights alone made the land worth close to $200,000 to the neighboring ranchers who needed access. But I didn't want to sell. Instead, I negotiated a deal with 3 neighboring ranchers. They could access the water source on my property for an annual fee, giving me steady income while I figured out what to build. Janet helped me connect with local contractors who could work affordably, and I started making plans. The barn would come down safely, and in its place, I'd build a small house. Nothing fancy, but solid and permanent. The hidden room would remain, expanded and improved, as a root cellar and storage space, and the land itself would be restored, cleared, and prepared for whatever future I decided to create. I enrolled in online courses on sustainable agriculture and small business management using my grandmother's laptop and the internet connection I had installed. The community of Cedar Ridge, small as it was, embraced me. Janet became like an aunt, introducing me to everyone and making sure I was never truly alone. I found work at the local feed store, learning about ranching from the customers who came in and building relationships with the people who worked the land around me. They had stories about my grandmother, about her strength and stubbornness, about how she'd loved this land fiercely. 3 months after discovering the hidden room, I was standing on my property watching the foundation being poured for my new house when a truck pulled up. An elderly man got out, moving slowly but with purpose. "You must be Emma," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Frank Morrison. I ranched next to your grandparents for 40 years. We talked for over an hour, Frank sharing memories of my grandmother and grandfather, painting a picture of their life together that made them real to me in ways the photos and videos couldn't. He told me about my mother as a little girl, wild and fearless, riding her horse across these same hills. "Your grandmother never stopped loving you," Frank said as he prepared to leave. "She talked about you all the time after she found out where you were. It ate at her that she couldn't be part of your life. But she was so proud of you, Emma, Every little accomplishment, every report she could get about you, she celebrated like it was the greatest achievement in the world. As my house took shape over the following months, so did my life. I wasn't just building walls and a roof. I was building a future, a home, an identity that belonged to me. The day I moved into my finished house, Janet organized a community celebration. Half of Cedar Ridge showed up with food and gifts, welcoming me officially as one of their own. I gave tours of the small but efficient house, showing off the bedroom, kitchen, and living area that felt like palaces compared to my tiny space at Meadowbrook. But the most important moment came at sunset when everyone had left, and I sat on my new porch watching the light fade over the hills. I thought about my grandmother, about all the work she'd done in secret to give me this chance. She'd built me a foundation when I had nothing, given me roots when I'd spent my whole life floating. The ranch wasn't worthless. It never had been. It was everything I needed to become who I was meant to be. I pulled out my phone and recorded a video message, saving it to the laptop downstairs in what I now called Grandma's room. "Hi, Grandma," I said, looking into the camera. "I found it. I found everything you left me, and I want you to know that I'm going to make you proud. This ranch, this life you gave me, I'm going to honor it. I'm going to build something beautiful here, something that would make you and Mom smile. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I didn't know you were there. I love you too." I saved the video and added it to the collection, my contribution to the family history that had been hidden beneath a collapsed barn, waiting for me to discover it. The lawyer had been right about one thing. The ranch had only a collapsed barn, but beneath that barn was everything I'd ever needed: love, history, purpose, and a future worth fighting for. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe to this channel. Tomorrow, I'm sharing another story about unexpected inheritance that will absolutely shock you. I'd love to hear from you in the comments too. Have you ever discovered something about your family that completely changed your perspective? What's the most valuable thing someone's ever left you, whether it was money, property, or just wisdom? Share your stories below, and before you go, click on one of those videos on your screen. Each one is a journey worth taking. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most valuable inheritances are the ones nobody else can see.